Well, you say you're woke, but the companies you work for, I mean, unbelievable. Apple, Amazon, Disney. If ISIS started a streaming service, you'd call your agent, wouldn't you? So, if you do win an award tonight, don't use it as a platform to make a political speech. You're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world. Most of you spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg. So, if you win, right, come up, accept your little award, thank your agent and your God, and fuck off, okay?
Welcome to Catharsis Corner.
Wokeness has infested every corner of the sports and entertainment industry, repurposing our favorite means of escapism, be it film, video games, sports ball or even comics, as a means to spread their condescending propaganda. They believe they are our betters who need to educate us through the doctrine of shut up and listen. Case in point are the Oscars, a once venerated awards ceremony and must-see TV. Now, people frankly don't give a damn. More and more have voiced their dissent by watching anything else, or even nothing at all. The 2021 Oscars has seen it at the pinnacle of apathy, with a ratings drop over 50% from 2020, itself the least watched since they began televising them in 1953. It's bad enough they've done away with the one thing that makes them worth watching, a competent master of ceremonies like Billy Crystal, but year after year it's increasingly been used as a platform to preach from. The Oscars themselves no longer go to films on their artistic merits, going now to films which advance the correct political messaging. The 2021 Oscars were the wokest yet, and Regina King wasted no time getting to the heart of what the Oscars are really all about.
It has been quite a year, and we are still smack dab in the middle of it. We are mourning the loss of so many, and I have to be honest, if things had gone differently this past week in Minneapolis, I might have traded in my heels for marching boots. Now, I know that a lot of you people at home want to reach for your remote when you feel like Hollywood is preaching to you.
Regina, we didn't pick up the remote to tune in the first place. You know we're done with politics tainting our entertainment, and yet here you are. But by all means, Regina, preach on. You have us on the edge of our seats.
But as a mother of a black son, I know the fear that so many live with, and no amount of fame or fortune changes that. Okay?
How well does Regina's fear match reality? We can test if Regina's fears are justified by analyzing data taken from Statista, the CDC, the U.S. Census Bureau and the Bureau of Justice Statistics. The data from these sources was limited to between the years 2013, when Statista started keeping statistics on the use of lethal force, and 2019, which is the latest year for which BJS has published an annual crime report. An average of 1,095 criminal offenders are killed in arrest attempts by police. Breaking this number down by racial group, we can see that the greatest number of those killed are white Americans, nearly double that of black Americans. Yet many people believe that more black than white Americans are killed by police each year. This has to do with how news media outlets selectively cover officer-involved shootings. Newsstories covering officer-involved deaths of black Americans are more sensational and increase ratings in the current socio-political climate. This skews our impression of reality through what is known as availability bias. We believe more black than white Americans are killed by police because that is what the news media chooses to show us. Conservative pundit Larry Elder poses an interesting question. We can all name a black criminal offender who perished as a result of police attempting to make an arrest. Despite the number of white offenders, who met the same fate being almost double that of black offenders, how many of us can name even one? Of course, the population of the US is not uniform, but quite inhomogeneous. White Americans make up the largest racial group, comprising some 60% of the overall population. Black Americans make up a much smaller portion, about 13%. When we combine these two charts to calculate the number of police-involved deaths in each racial group, a million population, we see that Black and Native Americans are 3 times as likely to be in a fatal interaction with police as white Americans. Interestingly, and conveniently ignored in discussions of this topic, is that Asian Americans are only half as likely as white Americans to die in an altercation with police. It is absolutely true then that a disproportionately greater number of Black, Native and to a lesser extent, Hispanic Americans are killed by police in the US than we would expect from a naive analysis using racial demographics of society as our standard. Is this the end of the discussion? No. There's more to this story. The problem with the claim that Black Americans are 3 times as likely to suffer death at the hands of police is this: we have no reason to believe that police-involved fatalities should be reflected in population demographics. The only way in which this would be a valid approach is if the population is being sampled with proper randomization. In other words, police would have to make arrests at random. These data are telling us that the sampling method, in this case, police arresting criminal offenders, is non-random. That is the most that can be concluded from comparing the racial demographics of fatalities at the hands of police to the level of representation in the overall population. Any hypothesis put forward to explain why one does not map onto the other must itself be tested. Reaching for institutional racism without testing that hypothesis is a fallacy of logic known as affirming the consequent. Racism is a sufficient explanation for the higher than expected numbers of police use of lethal force when the offender is Black or Native American, but it is not a necessary explanation. Concluding institutional racism is the answer ignores any other possible explanation. That the sampling method is non-random hardly comes as a surprise. Police arrest those who they believe have committed crime, not random citizens on the street. In choosing societal rather than criminal demographics, claimants are making what is known as a sample frame error. We have no warrant, no reason to expect any relationship between the racial makeup of society and fatalities due to the use of lethal force. The claim could still be true if there exists a correspondence between the racial makeup of arrests for violent crime and in the overall population. But we can plainly see that this too is not the case. A totally different picture emerges when racial demographics of arrests for violent crimes, robbery, aggravated assault and murder, are used in place of population demographics. The correspondence between the racial makeup of arrests for violent crimes and police-involved deaths is unequivocal. Not only are the higher than expected number of fatalities with police involving Black, Native and Hispanic suspects explained, but also the lower than expected death when the offender is of Asian heritage. Invoking institutional racism is an unnecessary hypothesis. The conclusion of this analysis: a small percentage of arrests for violent crime end in police resorting to the use of lethal force. This percentage is independent of the race of the offender. There may be something else this picture is telling us. Scaling the use of force fatalities chart to minimize deviations between the two hints that fewer than expected arrests of Black offenders result in fatality, not more. However, we can only state this as a possibility since we have no way of knowing the actual scaling factor. When I began this video, I had no idea what the outcome from this analysis would be. If anything, I expected a complex interplay of factors and a proper analysis of the data would require multivariate statistics. That a single variable, the number of arrests for violent crimes, yielded such a clear relationship between race and police use of lethal force came as a great surprise. Let me be absolutely clear, these data do not support the contention that race is a significant factor in the use of lethal force by law enforcement. So while the claim that Black Americans are 3 times as likely to be killed by police as white Americans during arrests is true, it is also totally misleading. The data show that the relationship between the number of arrests leading to fatality and violent crime is a simple proportionality. It is crime, not policing, that is the problem. No racial group has a greater or lesser number of criminal offenders just because of their skin tone. Unpacking what we really mean in these discussions, racial groups are containers of convenience for a set of social variables which describe conditions largely shared by members of an identifiable demographic. These factors include culture, education, segregation and socioeconomic opportunities. A discussion of this difficult and complex topic is beyond the scope of this video. Suffice it to say that public policies designed to improve the quality of these predictors of outcome will be the answer to decreasing crime. It will take time to see the positive effects of such policies. But police deal with crime in the here and now. With this in mind, I pose my first question, Regina. Are you raising your child to choose a fulfilling life as a productive member of society, or will your child choose a life of crime? I'm sure you're raising him in a way where he will choose the former and not the latter. In that case, the chances of his dying at the hands of police are essentially non-existent. Even if your son runs afoul of the law, so long as he doesn't resist arrest, there is still nothing to fear. It's when criminals decide to evade arrest by violently resisting or take actions which directly endangers the lives of others the chances of coming to grievous bodily harm rise. Why does the claim that racial bias significantly affects the use of lethal force by police persist? The answer is simple. Despite the invalid assumption underlying the claim, it serves to reinforce a victimhood narrative. Blaming police is easier than addressing the root causes of crime. Any view that might shatter the victimhood narrative and cause people to look inwards must be zealously and violently suppressed. Heresy is not to be tolerated, and critical race theory brooks no dissent. Cognitive dissonance must be avoided at all costs. Academics who dare to question victimhood dogma have their careers threatened. Petitions calling for the resignation of professors deemed to be racist pop up like mushrooms. Michigan State University professor Stephen Sue was forced to resign from his position as Vice President of Research and Innovation. His crime was publishing a study which concluded there is no evidence of racial bias when it comes to police using lethal force. The study was deemed to be an example of scientific racism, and Sue was defamed and vilified. It does not matter that the conclusion of his study is supported by objective evidence. Untenured professors can simply be fired for so much as questioning dogma. Universities are no longer centers of independent thought. Indeed, professors who have adopted the ideology of social justice shamefully partake in demonizing their peers. This is the standard modus operandi of the cult of victimhood. Regina, there are far more serious threats to your son's life than police, and by no means is what follows an exhaustive list of them. Heart disease and cancer are significant risks for fatality in men aged 15 to 44. Combined, they are responsible for between 10 and 20% of all deaths. Far greater than the less than 1% of all deaths resulting from police use of lethal force. Suicide takes far too many lives, but it is far more frequent in men than women by a factor of 3. It is the second leading cause of death of Asian, Hispanic, Caucasian and indigenous men behind accidental injury, fourth in Black American men. Amongst all racial groups, the number of suicides peaks in the late teens or early 20s. Accidental injury is a major cause of death in young men aged 15 to 44. It is in fact the leading cause of death amongst young men in all racial groups. All save one. Regina expresses no concern for her son's safety over threats far more likely than police use of lethal force. But the biggest threat to the lives of young black men has yet to come. Homicide ranks relatively low in Caucasian, Asian and Native American groups, and is about 3 times higher in Hispanic men in this age group than for white Americans. But in the black community, homicide is responsible for more than 1/3 of all deaths in men between the ages of 15 and 44. There are more young black American men murdered than die as a result of accidental injury. More than from heart disease. More than from cancer. More than from suicide. The Bureau of Justice Statistics Crime in the U.S. report for 2019 shows that 2,574 out of 2,906 black victims, some 90%, were murdered by another member of their own community. This brings me to my second question, Regina, why are you more afraid of your child being killed by police when so many other threats pose far greater risks to his life? This is nothing short of anti-police hysteria. This concludes part 1 of a 2-part series looking at the claims made during the 2021 Oscars award ceremony. In part 2 we shall have a look at Trevon Free's Oscar-winning short film and how well it mimics reality, the use of lethal force by police and the dangers. In part 3, the final chapter, we will look at some of the dangers police face every day, and how anti-police hysteria is beginning to negatively affect policing. Thank you for watching. Please like and share the hell out of this video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.